Hi, and welcome to Art Alap, a podcast dedicated to conversations on visual culture. Today, we have with us Harikrishna Katragadda and Shweta Upadhyay, winners of the Alkazi Photobook Grant for their project, I'll Be Looking at the Moon, but I'll Be Seeing You. Their photo book, in their words, attempts to capture ways of seeing one's lover as well as responding to the narrative by layering the images with text, fabric, and other objects, transforming the images into self-reflective composites. In this episode, we're going to be discussing many things: Shweta and Hari's award-winning work through their process and influences, and the status of the photo book in India, of course, but also poetry, cinema, and Gothic marriages. Let me introduce you to them. Hari Katragadda is a visual artist whose work explores communities, environment, and personal memories using photography, text, drawings. He received the India Habitat Photosphere Grant, National Foundation for India Fellowship, and the Invisible Photographer Asia Art Award in 2018. Shweta Upadhyay is a writer and an artist who works with photographs. She is the assistant editor of Art India magazine and has worked as the art editor of Time Out Delhi. Shweta and I have actually known each other for a long time through our Alma Daftar of sorts, Art India. Hi guys, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Kamaini.
Thank you, Kamani, for inviting us.
Great, I'm delighted to have you. Before we continue, I'd like to let our listeners know how to access the visual material accompanying our conversation. To view the images being discussed in the episode, click on the link in the show notes to download the guide. You can also download the image guide for each episode from our Twitter and Instagram pages. I thought we could begin by talking about the form of the photo book itself. What works have been your influences, and what drew you to the format or made you feel that it was best suited to your vision?
Yeah, so I think the form of the photo book can propel a story, a narrative. And our story was about not just about us, our marriage, but also about our imagination or collective imagination at that point in time, like the films that we were watching, our influences in literature. So we wanted to create a narrative of that particular period of time. So that's why we chose photo book as a form. And our influences have been, I think, E.H. Engstrom and also like somebody like Katinka Goldberg surfacing. So so we were looking at a lot of photo books, we were watching cinema, and we were reading a lot of books. And it also, Hari was shooting me, and then we had like a horde of images. And then we decided what should we do about them. And its first iteration was in the form of a photo essay. And then I think Alkazi had come up with a photo book grant in 2016. So I think we made a photo book to apply for it. It was actually the first iteration also got received, was shortlisted for the award. And then the project received an impetus. And then the second iteration was shown at Serendipity Arts Festival. Mm-hmm. So I think there was an impetus. It's also like a personal narrative, and the book form sort of like supported it. That's why we started on it. We were looking at a lot of reading books, and we had just shifted to Bombay, and it was the first year of our marriage. And so there were like a lot of, it's intense, right? It's and sort of the photograph sort of reflected that. And one of the influences is Jean-Luc Godard's Contempt, the opening scene, especially the opening scene where you see that Brigitte Bardot is lying in bed. And she's asking Michel Piccoli, "Do you love me?" And she's actually running through her entire body, like, "Do you love my thighs?" So he says yes, and then she's, "Do you love my hand? Do you love my eyes?" And after she finishes every body part, she says, "Oh, then you love me completely." So that's opening scene. It's just actually the opening scene that we are influenced by. We started to think about the nature of love. Mm-hmm. What do we love when we love someone? Right? Do we just love the body parts? And when you say body, what do you mean by the body? We see the surface, right? We never see, we don't know the interior organs or the state or the health of the interior, the internal organs, right? We don't love somebody's liver or like kidneys.
Well, you're forgetting Jigar Ka Tukda, but sure.
Jigar Ka Tukda. Yeah.
So I took your point. I'm just messing with you. Yeah.
But that's true. What do we love? And how do we then we compare the body parts to, it's very metaphorical, right? Metaphorical. you can it's just surface, and then you compare it to other surfaces that are available to you, the world around you.
Yeah.
The book is like trying to map the scale of desire vis-a-vis the universe,
Hmm.
scale of universe vis-a-vis human desire. Like, how do you transform the world when you desire someone, and
Hmm.
does the universe gets transformed also, right? So I think that was the initial impetus of this project.
Right.
So for me, Robert Frank, the Swiss American photographer, his work called The Americans, the book he made in '50s, it's been a huge influence for me. It's about how you condense, almost 10 years of shooting across America, and talk about his feeling about, alienation or racism, the power, the false feeling of triumph which Americans had after the World War II. So how does he condense so much of material into a book form? That was like, always a kind of a big inspiration for me. So in a way, this body of work is also about like how do you condense a few years of shooting. I mean, I didn't really have anything specific in my mind when I was shooting, and this shooting mostly happened when we moved to Bombay, and I wanted to work as a cinematographer in the industry in Bombay, but I realized quickly that I'm not a person who can work with large crews, and I'm best doing work by myself. So when we first moved to Bombay, we didn't know anybody here, and then pretty much we spent most of the time at home watching films, talking, reading books, just observing each other, rather listening to each other and stuff like that. And that was also a time I didn't do much assignments. I'm a trained photojournalist, and that was a time when the only thing I was photographing was Shweta. And my walks, I walked a lot in the morning, and during my early morning walks I shot things what I saw around my house. So most of these images are basically they happened during this 2-3 years of pretty much staying at home, and taking a break from my regular work as photojournalist. So once we started working on this photo essay, and then thought about how do we take it further, book form kind of felt like natural to give shape to our feeling about what do we do with this whole body of work. It was kind of an organic process based on our conversations and our influences, and we somehow each iteration was kind of shaping it into a much more honest way of our own feelings about each other, and also about our general ideas about art and literature, films. And
Yeah, I'm hearing you guys talk about this, and I'm also wondering whether the form of the photo book itself, it's so intermedial, right? Because it provides a sort of plane for you to bring together a confluence of different thoughts and forms and genres onto one surface again, to kind of go back to that word. And that's interesting also because it kind of ties into what Shweta mentioned, about this kind of rhyming between the world, the outside, the cosmos, and the interior, right? Your own self. That this kind of transformation that's happening. The photo book allows you to record that in a way by bringing in all these different, shared or individual musings or materials. So I think that's what's interesting to me. That really, stood out even when I was going through your book. Just the kind of range of matter and substance, both figurative and physical, that's present in the book. And since you brought it up, your engagement or your kind of who you were looking at, who were you looking to in the state as this project evolved. In India, we don't quite have an established legacy of the photo book as an aesthetic form, apart from Dayanita Singh and more recently someone like Sora Bhura. We do have a history of albums, of course, from the very beginning of photography in South Asia, but that's as part of our everyday life with images as a culture. So, what traditions or influences did you link your practice to within the subcontinent? Or in general, I'm asking this also because Hari, you mentioned that you worked as a photojournalist. I know that you graduated with a degree in photojournalism from UT Austin. So you engaged with the craft as a student and through the mode of more classical photojournalism. What kind of traditions do you think are have can you connect your work to?
I would say, this was also a break for me from my photojournalistic background and documentary photography, where you treat image as, a sacred, a final thing. Like you don't want to move a pixel here or there. That's like a big no-no in photojournalism and documentary photography. But my 3 years break, during which I was thinking about the medium, I was also questioning, this whole assumptions which go into, truth and objectivity and our ideas of the world through photography, mediated through photography. And I was not really convinced that, this kind of it felt like some kind of a false rigor. It didn't feel like, the world need to be seen only through the lens of photojournalism, like fly on the wall or an objective observer who's not, part of the scene. So for me, that break was important to get into this thinking about the book itself. And Shweta, being not from the photojournalism or photography background, she didn't have the same reverence for images, which I trained to feel about the images. So that was the point where it felt like any intervention on the image felt just like a natural thing to how do you push the image to make meaning out of it, which can be very limited by your own photojournalistic rules. So that was a thing. And I would say films and poetry were like a huge undercurrents for the my thinking itself about the structure of the book, or how the book can make meaning from just like what Dayanita says, use photographs as raw materials. So that's something which perhaps both of us understood, that once you have images, can we take it further? And I guess the subtext of the book could be like how a cinema is, how you have a set of images which go in time, and then you have music or dialogues layered on top. Somehow, we felt like that's what this book would be. Also, we started this book as a traditional photo book, as like a image spread or like two images on a spread, something like that. But eventually, the form which felt very natural to this whole set of images and what we wanted to say, it became an accordion form. So accordion form is this. It's like one long sheet of paper on which images are printed, and you just fold them, and it looks like an
Like
accordion.
Dayanita Singh sent a letter,
Yes,
sort
yes,
of that
something like that.
form.
Yeah. So again, if you just spread this accordion fold book on the floor, you'll see that these
Hmm.
images are like scenes stitched together, and
Hmm.
then the text could be like the dialogues, and
Yeah.
the music is like music, or any sounds could be like the interventions on top of it. So one can see like some kind of a parallel between a cinematic rendition onto a book form. So that's one our homage to cinema in a way. Also like poetry, in a way where the images in which in the book, they kind of vanish and become something else. It's like lines in a poem, they just become something else, transform into something else. And sometimes they can be connected to the earlier ones, or sometimes they can be completely a surprise to you. So somehow we wanted to get that feeling too in the book.
I mean, we'll have a chance to delve more into both these aspects, the cinematic and the lyrical, the poetic, that's evident in the book. I also wanted to ask you guys, and I mean, here, I think Shweta, I want to weigh in also as, an editor. You work with books. I mean, a magazine is a sort of book, right? You're putting it together. And I'm interested to know how you approach bookmaking, because we don't acknowledge it really, but bookmaking as a fine art in this country. Can you talk a bit about the making of the book as a physical object?
So in the beginning, I was involved mostly in the concept of the book. Like we worked together on the concept, and the concept was not. I don't think it was fully fleshed out in the beginning. We didn't. So it's been years, and obviously you bring your own life experiences and uh, to evolve the project, right? But in the beginning, it was like the body and the world, pitching the body against the world, right? So then the editing in the initial phase, editing was like body part with an image of the environment. That was the initial phase. But slowly with time, we also felt that it's not just like formal similarities or symmetries that should inform the editing, but also the subconscious, like subconscious feelings that to. So we were creating a kind of atmosphere. There were certain moods. One of the influences was Nair Masood. So I was bringing a lot of like my reading of text and poetry and informing that in the editing process, right? So it need be like linear, need not be like one image should speak to the image beside it in in a linear fashion. Like it should be symmetrical formally, like the form should match, right? So then we started delving into the interior aspects of that image. So what is that person feeling? The point is, like, later we sort of decided there will be a narrative around it. So it's also about what is the protagonist feeling, and can we juxtapose an image that sort of suggests the feeling of the protagonist in that particular frame. Thing was, I think, informed by what the narrative would be, the narrative arc, and it was not symmetrical. It was not like, okay, one image and the other juxtaposed image should be like linear. So that was one of the things that we were thinking about.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's one of the things that also intrigued me when I went through the book. Is that the movement of time in the photo book is quite unique in a way. It seems, I mean, almost as you said, cinematic, as Hari was saying. With there's a sense of encountering jump cuts and montages and repetitive motifs as well, and sort of you can go through the book according to your own whim, but once you close it, sort of it collapses into a predetermined temporal structure. So that dynamic was really interesting. Hari, do you want to talk about cinema? As you were talking about how you initially wanted to be a cinematographer, then chose a more solitary practice. How do you think that that's inflected this book in relation to also what Shweta was saying as an editor?
So after the book was made, we were like wondering, what kind of form we came up. We really didn't know what we had in our hands. We were like, I mean, it was a lot of trial and error and back and forth discussions, and we made like a few dummies, in which we were trying to work out. I mean, literally, like, the book started with just my photographs and Shweta, intervening as an editor. And then the point came when she wanted to have her own voice in the book. So that's when, I said, okay, I'm going to lose my control on the images and let her take over and intervene. And then sometimes she would go too far, and then, I had to like pull her back a little bit. So it was a kind of a negotiation in that way. And then, we tried to come up to a common understanding of how the rhythm should be, how it should progress. So that was how we made a few dummies. And then after the whole thing was made, and then we wondered, like, how do you make sense? Like, is there a structure to this? So I showed it to a publisher from Bromide Publishing called Alexander Vernon. And he kind of broke it down, to a 9-act structure, almost like a 9-act cinematic structure, which was like very interesting. We never thought of a cinematic structure as such. It was just very intuitive for us. But this guy actually, like literally broke it down to like, okay, Act 1 is introduction, Act 2 is Fallen Angel, and then Act 3 is Awakening of Senses, or Foreplay, he called it. And then he called it Multiple Legions of Grace or something like that. I don't remember right now. And then 5th is then Incline, and then Consent, and then the Act, and the Great Ending. So the ending, there's a cave, and there's you hit almost with a wall. So he broke it down. That was quite interesting, because we never ever really thought of a screenplay kind of a structure, but that's what he's found it. Right. But after, we made a few dummies, and the last dummy came out. We also saw this film by Werner Herzog called The Cave of Forgotten Dreams.
Right. What a lovely film.
Yeah. So
I was just thinking of that when I saw the final images. I thought you'd talk about it anyway. Go on. Yeah.
Actually, it's like a big coincidence that we saw that film after we made the dummy, and then it just occurred to me that maybe unknowingly we were trying to use some images in a very pre-verbal way, like something which you cannot articulate, but they intuitively make sense to us. Like we do feel images, and we do see, we look at things, and sometimes we don't have words for them. We cannot articulate in words. And film is about something like people in the caves and drawings. Probably they didn't have so much of language to talk about the experiences and feelings, but they kind of articulated on the wall by drawing, by images.
Yeah.
So it's like maybe some kind of memories, a reservoir of memories. This book is a reservoir of memories of past, present, and future, something like that. So I would see the book not necessarily as a narrative, but like a feeling, or some kind of a reservoir of memories
and
dreams, of course.
Because
Yeah.
there's a dreamlike quality in the book, right? In the sense that you can't differentiate between the real world and your dream worlds. There are texts about dreams in this book.
So the jump cuts which you talked about, sometimes dream logic doesn't really make sense in the real world, but it has its own logic in the dream world. So yeah, so perhaps jump cuts are like that,
Yeah, because I think that's true, right? I mean, you don't experience time in a dream the way that you do in life. That's also why you don't remember how you get from point A to point B in a dream. There's actually a fantastic essay that I think you guys should read if you haven't already, by the poet Lavinia Greenslaw. It's called The Vast Extent on Seeing and Not Seeing Further. And she talks about Herzog's film in a very interesting and beautiful way that I think that, might, I don't know, resonate with you as well. To kind of come back to this, the dreamlike, this oniric quality that the photo book has as well. You both have compared and talked about the influence, compared this work to and talked about the influence of a writer like Nair Masood, who is, stories are really enigmatic and a bit spooky as well. The way he takes us through Lucknow. And actually, I was put in mind when I was reading the book, I did think it had a sort of haunting and dark quality at moments. And it was like being in a house in which someone you once knew, lived. And then I was put in mind of Maya Deren's film, Meshes of the Afternoon, which she incidentally made along with her husband, Alexander Hamid. And it was also monochromatic, disjointed, and shot through with a sense of the uncanny. And there are all these elements, like a doppelganger and this, strange figure.
Many doppelgangers.
Yeah, many doppelgangers. There are like this ominous figure. She's trapped in a house, and there are all these parallels between the domestic setting and the psychological trauma. They run parallel to each other. So, do you want to talk about, both of you? Want to talk about capturing this sort of multi-layered and dynamic interiority through the lens and through language?
So I personally don't think that. I think Maya Deren's that Meshes of the Afternoon is too dark, and I mean it's in the sense that it ends with a suicide, and it's too traumatic, and they're like, so it's too intense. So our book is much more. I think it's like a Gothic romance, and this is important. The space of the book, like if you see the space, there are closets with secrets and maybe suggestive trapdoors, and there are also apps with sort of like postcards that suggest, that gives clues to maybe what's happening. These are just clues which
or like mentions of former lovers, right?
Former lovers. So it's Gothic because also like one subversive act, like when I saw the images and I felt that it doesn't really reveal the squalor or the messiness of their lives, right? In the sense that the images in themselves are ominous and a bit dark if you really look at them closely. I mean, they're not like one critic I think pointed like it's like a French romantic photography, which I actually never agreed to, because it's not romantic, but it's more like a Gothic romance.
Yeah, I didn't exactly. Yeah, Gothic is a better term. Yeah.
Also, there are a lot of birds, if you see, and they're
absolutely, and they're constantly like rhyming with other objects, and there's something really eerie.
Yeah,
about them.
there is. So for me, it was much more like how to bring that out, the scholar of inner life through narrative. And
Hmm.
um, and there are like in the space also there are like it suggests there is a mystery which remains unsolved. And I read it like as an art critic, I also read the work, right? So for me it's more like the photographer is like an investigator who is looking for a missing person, because there is a sense of something missing, something that was there and something that you can't grasp, that has escaped or has just gone away. And the moon itself, right? You can never, the moon itself changes shape.
Yeah.
So, so the Gothic was important. And in Nair Masood's, for example,
Hmm.
stories, people go off to sleep, and
Yeah.
then this, right? And then what happens that then it continues with the narrative, and you don't know whether that's a dream or reality.
Yeah. How there are like these empty streets that, suddenly go nowhere.
Zones of desires and zones of fear.
Yeah.
You go to, there was
Yeah.
a story about this house inspector who goes to a house and
Yeah.
could just
Yeah.
from the sensation around him, he could gauge whether this zone is a house of desire or this house is a zone of fear. So
Yeah.
when the house that we live in currently, so when I first entered this house, I there were like a lot of pigeons in the house.
Hmm.
So I came and I felt, so in Nayyar Masood's story, there is a thing that if you go into a zone of desire, all your dreams will come true. So
Yeah.
I was entered this house, a lot of pigeons, and I somehow feeling that all my desires that I am holding right now will come true in the house. And a lot of pictures are from this house. In a way, Nayyar Masood was working in my consciousness at that point. Stories. So I think the book has, it could be read as a Gothic mystery, right? And escape, something that has gone, and the moon and the birds, everything suggests that. Also, in Gothic novels, you see the woman has no past.
Hmm.
The man has all these secret, like he has the mansion, and like Rebecca, for example,
Hmm.
and you see, and there is a woman and that haunts you. So I wanted to bring in my ghost, like that was a subversive act, right? Like
Hmm.
was and stuff like that. And I think Paul Anderson movie's Phantom Thread is a sort of a reworking of Rebecca, right?
Hmm.
So one influence is
Right.
like in his dress costumes, he would leave some notes about his feet,
Hmm.
like some scraps, right? So I was also doing this in the book. And then fragments that could be like Duchampian ready-made, but which if you
Yeah.
pluck it out of context and put it on an image, that image
Hmm.
is enigmatic and abstract, and meaning you don't know what's the meaning of that image. So you're just pushing the limit of the image and making it multi-layered, also exhausting the image.
Hmm.
For me, the texture in Maya Deren's film, like as a grainy, high
Hmm.
contrast images, somehow resonate with the imagery in this book.
Hmm.
Where I've deliberately put these images, high contrast and grainy too. So yeah, there is a certain affinity towards that kind of a cinema.
But I think it's darker. Maya Deren is darker than this.
Yeah, but I think there's a chiaroscuro, that you immediately think of, and the sort of some of the asymmetries, the geometries in the
Right, right.
photo book, they sort of
Yeah.
reminded me a little bit of
Yeah.
just formally. But you're right. I mean, her work is darker, although one could argue that is also a kind of Gothic film.
Yeah, it is. Repressed emotions, the space is.
Yeah, and it's subversive in its own way because the protagonist sort of ultimately succumbs, to this kind of tragedy of knowledge in a way. One thing that I was really interested in with regard to the photo book was what the technological choices that you made that informs the aesthetic, because the images have a really old world kind of quality to them that probably adds to the mystery that we've been discussing. What camera did you use, and what technology or techniques did you adopt in the making of the photo book?
This entire project was shot on a digital camera, Nikon digital camera, but I wanted a certain retro look of the 50s and 60s. Most of the documentary work during that time was shot on this film called Tri-X, a very Kodak Tri-X, which is a very forgiving film. You can shoot in any conditions. You can screw up your exposure, lighting, whatever, and you can still get acceptable results. It's very forgiving film in that way. So where digital images look, they're very clean and very sharp. They don't have the same kind of organic feel which tracks photographs look like. So the way it's been shot is, consistently I've shot all these images at 1 second exposure, which is not what you normally shoot photographs with. And then it's also mixed with a flashlight. So it's 1 second exposure of ambient light and mixed with a flashlight. So every image has a certain slight blur to it and also a certain graininess to it. And I try to keep that consistent throughout the book and process it in a way so that, it has a tracks kind of feel. And again, we can reference to the old films or old documentary photography work, or even Maya Deren's, Measures in the Afternoon. Mm-hmm. That's something which, I hope it comes across in the book. But it's beyond the point, it was a deliberate choice to shoot in a certain way to keep the whole look consistent.
Right. Yeah, I think it really comes through as well, because the images do have this very vintage kind of quality, as if they were shot, as if they are from another time. So I think that you really managed to achieve that. It struck me that when I was looking at the images, and then I know that Shweta's talked about it elsewhere also, this relationship between landscape and memory. There's a certain kind of fascination with this in photo books, and we've seen this. It's almost a subgenre, whether it's Talbot's albums or Brasai's book Graffiti or Rusha's Stations. Shweta, you've talked about using landscape to allegorize the body in love in the vein of Sangam poetry. So the body is omnipresent, I felt like, in this book. Yours, of course, obviously, because you're the subject of many images, but also Hari's, as he's recording, he's sort of a witness.
And other people's also. You don't know whose text.
That's true.
What is where does the text origin or the conversation having with whom? It need not be with Hari. So,
no, I meant Hari as a physical witness with the camera. Yeah. But of course, there are all of these other entities and, people and figures from the past and, that are also, of course, part of your textual, bits. And your body is also inscribed in, you're inscribing the images with your own handwriting. So there's something quite physical about that as well. And so your shared memories kind of become this embodied in a way.
When you love the body, then what do you love in a body, and how can you grasp a body? You actually love a character, something which is ineffable, something that you can never grasp, and you sort of try to grasp it through metaphors, through meaning making, and comparing it to other things, other surfaces it touches, right? So that was the idea. But obviously, because I did my post-graduation in ancient history, and there was this Tinnai poetry, Sangam poetry. And so I was aware of this tradition where, in Sangam poetry, every different kinds of lands, for example, a geographical region is divided into different kinds of parts, and every kind of landscape depicts an event of love, which, for example, hills would denote lovers' union, and and like a settled land, agricultural land would denote infertility, seashore would denote separation, and desert would denote something else, right? So every zone had a particular emotional resonance, and the fauna, flora of that region also evoked that particular emotion. For example, a crocodile would evoke anxiety in love. That was the background. I think that was something was in my mind. And also, it's like certain things that move you a lot, like certain texts that you have read, like English Patient, and I mean this poetry, and then you sort of know that it has affected you, and how when you create something, you bring all your influences in, right? So okay, how do I bring this notion and also like Tinnai poetry and also contempt and connect them, and then can we do something out of it? So I think that was the idea.
Yeah. Also, you, in terms of geographies, there's
geography is creates, right? I mean, geography creates your when you love, the entire world is sort of saturated with
Yeah.
To feel.
And there's people often, talk about their love in terms of space, in terms of cities, in terms of deserts, in terms of many different kinds of terrains. And actually, I thought that you've actually referenced the conceit of the book seems to be a sort of extraterrestrial landscape as well, right? Because you're talking about the moon. So, do you want to talk about that? Because you likened the self and relationships to this lunar surface.
So one of the ideas is, where is the story happening? Is it happening on the moon? And another thing that I'm going to add is, like, there is this poem by Carol Ann Duffy, The Woman on the Moon, or something like that, right? So one of the stories that I want to create, like, give it a mythical touch in my textual intervention, is maybe this is somebody came from a moon, and that person had an affair with a man on this world, and then she vanished. Perhaps one interpretation is this whole thing is happening on the moon. Who knows? And also has these different addresses, like there is this lake of dreams, then there is this lake, sea of clouds, then river of knowledge, and and who has not searched for a lover's face when you're looking at the moon? You would, if you have been in love, most probably you would have searched for a lover's face, right? So also moon is stained, has marks, and which is there throughout in this book, staining, marking. So the desire for the lover, the desire for the lover's body, the desire for the world, and desire for the image, these are intertwined in our desire for the moon, something that we cannot grasp, that is transitory, which you want to hold but you cannot, but it's just there for a certain period of time. There is a sense of loss, permanence, all that. So I think the book sort of talks about these aspects.
In fact, you write in one of your texts that the desire for the moon is the same as the desire for photography, and it sort of comes together.
So maybe Ruthful has this line that she says that the moon is the first photograph, which I sort of didn't understand the physics of it, but I sort of thought of it as, like, maybe the moon is the first photograph because it's the photograph of the sun. And also, like, what do you photograph? You photograph something that you think which is transient, which if you don't grasp it, it will leave, right? And something that you want to hold and preserve. So I think the moon works as a metaphor for that.
But also, like, what was interesting to me was, what you said, and you said this about your practice. I'm quoting you, Shweta. You say that you employ erasure and defacement using text and fragments from your personal diary and include references from poetry, literature, and cinema that we've been discussing. So, in terms of,
so this project started in 2015, I think. So now when I see the book, it's somehow I want to see it as a found object, in the sense that all the text, like I have found somebody else's diary or a notebook or a picture book with all this text. So there is a kind of distance, because I sort of don't even identify with the text, in the sense that I am the writer or the author of those texts. So to treat your own text as found object, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah, or just how do you think of the found object within language? As through the modes of excerpt, through the modes of repurposing words. What are those interventions like? Like, what form do they take as a writer? Because I think, like, with the ready-made or the found object, we do know. I mean, we know the discourse around it in terms of conceptual or visual arts. But how do we do that if you foreground your identity as a writer? I think that's the question.
Okay, so,
like, what models do you have? Who are the people who've done it? How do you think of units of language?
So I didn't have, like, somebody else as references, as a reference, but the fact that I'm a reader and I read a lot of books, and then I sort of, you are gravitated towards text that sort of reveals something that perhaps is hidden in you. Right? And you feel that you come upon a sentence, and that could be just written by you, that explains you, and you copy that in your notebook. So it is found in a way because you're reading, you're getting it in between your readings, you somehow own it, you feel, because it sort of reflects your interior world. So in this book, obviously, a lot of text is in response to the images. There need not be something that is about our private life, but it could be sort of a fictional fragment that I have constructed based on those images. But a lot of other
Mm.
texts that I get it, I incorporate as clues
Mm.
to the subterranean world of these images, as like, if you want to decipher them, maybe these are clues. And obviously these are sentences that have meant something to me, that have stuck to me, and as quotations, as whose meaning somehow you have not really deconstructed, but which sort of, that it suggests something that has a meaning in your life, right? And you have, like, for example, there is a text by Sir Ballad, I think Patrick Spence. There is a quotation from that poem where he says that the new moon is an old moon's arms, and I fear there will be a deadly storm. This,
Hmm.
when I was in school, okay,
Right.
and it was actually as an epigraph to another poem, and somehow it stuck to me, and like, it just came, it meant a lot to me at that point also, and I didn't understand a word of it. Okay, I don't understand, what does it mean when you say that the new moon is in an old moon's arm, and I fear that there will be a deadly storm? It suggests something. I So it's like a found text which I use in this book. The found text suggests a certain underlying meanings, and it's very mysterious, but you can't really unravel what it means. You get a sense of it, but you really don't know what exactly it's trying to suggest.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned also the in the English Patient how
Yeah.
Herodotus histories
Daughter's
was
histories.
repurposed by this character, and so you tried to do that too.
Yeah, I did that too. At that point, when I read that English Patient in my early 20s, and guy who has this book, and he makes his own maps in relation to the text, and then he also inscribes his feelings for another woman who is with him, who's actually somebody else's wife, and what he feels about her in the margins of the book, right? So, and how do you inscribe yourself in an already existing book or a document? I sort of was very attracted to that. So when I took this book, it was a finished form, and how do I it does feature me as a protagonist, but how do I make it? How do I reveal myself more? How do
Yeah.
you meet the messiness of the self, or your interior life, or the squalor, right? Because I felt that I needed to bring in the squalor. Like, my handwriting is so pathetic. It's also to kind of legitimize my handwriting, because in school my teachers would always say, oh, you're so careless, and my mother had this ritual. Somebody told her that early in the morning, wake her up at 6, and without brushing her teeth, wash her hand and let her write, so her handwriting will improve. It never improved. So it's a kind of a revenge on my teachers, on my mother, that, what, like, my handwriting could be part of an artwork. And to accept yourself, and a lot of text is some of it is personal, and I wanted to be actually vulnerable. Like, why do you hide? As women, we are supposed to hide stuff, failures or rejections, as it's supposed to be personal failures in life, and how you should feel shame about them. So I was like, why should I feel shame? Because I had no control over those instances, and somehow I don't accept them as my personal failures. It was a result of certain circumstances. It had nothing to do with me or my ego. So to reveal your own self, right? It was also like a kind of rejection to maybe bad events. You're rejecting bad events in your life by saying that this happened to you, but I mean, I don't attach shame, or I don't think it's my failure. I had nothing to do.
I would like to add that the
This is in
song.
defense of Shweta's handwriting, Hari. We can tell.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So the title of the book, "I'll Be Looking at the Moon, but I'll Be Seeing You," is
Yeah.
from Billie Holiday's song "I'll Be Seeing You," her rendition of the song.
Mhm.
And I believe when people hear her singing this, they really break into tears. It's so emotional, and it's like people really lower the defenses when they hear this song,
Yeah.
and
It's a lovely song.
and open up with your vulnerabilities. And in a way, a lot of this is also about being vulnerable. It's like
Right.
Shweta implicating me in a way as a husband, and her own self. Like exposing herself.
Yeah. No, I get that. And I think just to, put a bow on the Gothic reference, it's like this reckoning with the past. Sometimes the past is your own past, right? And you rework that through something. In this case, it was this book. But actually, on that note, I also wanted to ask you, can you discuss your partnership as co-authors who are also spouses? What's interesting to me is the tension between text and image, which in many ways can define the photo book. It doesn't always do that, but there's a certain genre of photo book which is defined by this. And in the case of Moon, this dialectic gets reinforced because the writer is also the subject and wife. And those roles bring baggage associated with them, in the history of art, marriage, and power. So, do you want to address that? Maybe Hari can go first.
Yeah, it's partnerships, they're difficult when it comes, within the family, and especially a husband and a wife. We have like this constant dynamic of power. Whose word is the last word. That kind of thing. But somehow, for me, the big act of letting go was to let go of the control of the images. And once I was sure that I didn't want to have a control on the images, and let Shweta do whatever she wants to do with that, however she wants to intervene on them and work with them. So after that, there was really like we were on the same page, literally. So for me, it was a learning experience to get away from that photojournalistic understanding of images. Also, where ambiguity is not what you look for. Everything has to be clear. There's a message to why you're doing things, why this photograph is taken. There's a clear message and an implication. That's what I went away from in this book. And this collaboration really helped me because Shweta didn't have that baggage of photojournalism, for example. So that really kind of helped me, to break away my own shackles in a way. So I don't know how Shweta saw that.
What do you think, Shweta?
About power, I would say that it just shows that we have equal power. The book sort of reflects that he takes the images and I sort of write my own narrative. Not my own narrative, but a narrative which is suggestive of my interior world. So, and there was no editing, or I don't know whether Hari has even read them. So there was like,
wow, that sounds like a pointed comment.
yeah, I don't think he has read them. Yeah, he has not. Maybe he doesn't want to read them, but there was like an absolute freedom. And also, like, to get it in a way, it's any kind of representation. If you represent somebody, there is a kind of silence of the represented, right? I mean, take a picture, the person never gets to speak back, but I and Hari, we both are middle children, and middle children, they get a lot of space to be what they are, but they're also overlooked. Okay, so which gives them enough space to build their own personalities and a strong voice. So I took a long time to build a voice, but now I love the sound of my voice. So I had to sort of, I think, make my presence felt. And so in a way, I think this project sort of tells you that we are equal partners. Maybe there is a tension, like you can see that we need not agree. I mean, everything, but there is a space for different narrative.
Yeah.
At times contrasting narratives. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's sort of a complex legacy, right, of image making and being the object of images, that
which is very loaded. Like the male gaze is so loaded. How you represent the female, and the female figure never gets to speak back.
Yeah.
Or her version of her story. So in a way, I do get to speak, and through not just words, but through other interventions and artistic interventions. So I think the power relation is quite obvious in terms of, like, I mean, we are equal.
Yeah. No, that comes through in the work as well. I mean, the photo book as well. You can see that both of you are very present in it. I mean, I don't know Hari much, but I do know you, Shweta, and I can tell that there is definitely a balance. But I find that interesting also from the perspective of thinking about photo book projects that are of this autobiographical or memoiristic style in a way. People, like you mentioned, Katinka Goldberg, who's making this book about her relationship with her mother, and even Saurabh Hura's work, Life is Elsewhere, where he's trying to grapple with his youth in a way, through his relationship with a parent. So I think that's also interesting to me, how image and text, or that kind of expression can really come alive through the photo book's possibilities, and what it can afford you as both a maker of images and as a writer or a textual interventionist. So yeah, I mean, that was interesting to me to also see in this book. But I also wanted to talk about, discuss the role of metaphor in the book. And both of you, hinted at it, alluded to it in this conversation, but maybe we can have a discussion about that. It's a really lyrical book. There are rhymes like the butterfly that looks like the bird, on the facing page, and a piece of fabric that resembles the leaves next to it. There's a cracking wall, there's unexpected color, like gold safety pins, red thread, that details like light of various qualities, textile patterns. To those who know nothing of your life together, any outsider, these all of this becomes very laden with meaning. And of course, you've included excerpts by Basho, Anne Sexton, Mary Ruffle. They're all explicitly cited in the text. So, how do you view the relationship between poetry and photography? And I also want to ask this as a kind of sequel to the conversation we had about objective photography and turning the camera inwards. How do you do that?
Yeah, so Anne Sexton has been a huge influence for me right from my college days, and again, her poetry is very confessional and very intimate and emotional. So, to me, poetry influences the way I shoot. Some of the images are like fairly dark, or like things unexpected in a way, caught in the moment, and the editing, somehow comes out the way poetry progresses. For example, a surprising line or a sudden unexpected occurrence or something like that. So for me, that's the way poetry got connected to things. So I also use some of my paintings in the book, and they kind of also, they're kind of clues, in a way. You throw in some clues and also connected text to it. So that's the way I found connection with poetry. So I don't know, Shweta has.
So for me, I don't know whether photography and poetry are connected. I think a photograph can be a sentence in a poetry, because a poetry has one poem can have series of images that are interconnected, right? And so one image in a photo book could be one line of poetry. So I think maybe that, because like poet, you really don't understand, or you cannot really explain an image completely. And a photo, and even in poetry, an image, you know what it means, but you really cannot understand everything what they're trying to what it is trying to a photograph also, when you see it, you know what it, but there's always an excess, right? There's always something you don't understand. So maybe one photograph can be a line of a poem. And a metaphor, I would say that obviously there are repetitive images in the book. So sort of like there is repetition of motifs, and which sort of triggers memory in a way. Like as you progress in the book, you sort of know that you belong to the same story, because at intervals you say maybe birds, they and so you think that obviously in a way that you still belong to the same story. It triggers memory. There's a sense of belonging to a particular narrative. So metaphor works in that way. And also like the dream quality of it, like any book or any novel, it's dreamlike. And how do you make it dreamlike is through image repetition. There are it's like a tree that branches off. There are interrelated images that branches off in a particular direction. You really cannot decipher everything. I mean, there is a dreamlike quality, always open to interpretation. Always there is an excess. So I think that's what I think.
I would also say, Nair Masood's stories, for example, they don't have a closure in a way. they just, someone just said they just fade away. There's never a sense of an ending in his work.
Right.
So that's also another feeling, both editing.
There's a sense of interruption.
So each spread has that kind of a fading away or lack of closure kind of a quality. We try to, it's some. This is also an afterthought. It's not that we, thought, okay, let's not have a sense of ending or something like that. But it's an afterthought once we try to understand our own work. So these are some other things which we kind of have a smattering understanding. It's like, we put the work out there, but we really don't understand entirely ourselves. There is a certain, it is a mysterious process. Otherwise, I would like the fact that we were able to work on this book for 5 years without getting bored is because we were actually searching, for something, and we didn't really know what we were searching for. So that also, kind of kept us hooked to this whole project.
Right. And in fact, I did want to, speak briefly about the career of this project as well, over 7 years. So I'm quoting you again. You've talked about the, journey of the book, or its evolution rather. I'll be looking at the moon, but I'll be seeing you was published as a photo essay in Fountain Ink and the Indian Quarterly and Pix Quarterly. It was exhibited at Addis Ababa Photo Fest, Chennai Photo Biennale, Serendipity Arts Festival, Singapore International Photography Festival, Photobook Week RS, and Obscura Photography Festival. This photo book dummy was shortlisted for the pre-HSBC Porla Photography and won the 2020 Alkazi Fotobook Grant, which is what we're talking about. So this photo book has existed in many incarnations from 2013 when you began to now 2020. Over the 7 years that it took you to put it together in its existing form, what was your journey like as creators and collaborators? I mean, you talked about how, Hari, you mentioned how initially you just started, you thought of the project in a particular way, you conceived it in a particular way, and then later Shweta came on board and as a more active participant in terms of leaving her imprint on the work. Was that an organic process, or did you guys think about it before you embarked on making anything?
Shweta came as an editor, and we conceptualized it together. But she was
But this
always
was after you'd already started taking pictures, right?
Yeah. So we never thought of a photo book at all. It is not ever in the horizon. So it came as a photo essay, and then so Shweta was involved in editing the work to make the photo essay, and then the first dummy which we made it together. She was, she was involved as a conceptual on the conceptual side and as an editor.
This is the version that appeared in Fountain Ink.
Fountain Ink, yes. So that was 2015. And 2016, we made the first dummy, and it was shortlisted for the Alkazi Photobook Award, the first Alkazi Photobook Award. And at that time, Shweta was again the editor. And 2018, that's when, she said, "Okay, I'm going to destroy this book and let me make something else out of it." So yeah, she did.
Phoenix mode.
Yes. So that's when she, we were like, she became a co-author. So we were really on the same, on equal footing then. She has as much contribution to the book as my photographs. So that's my take on it. So we never really planned. We never planned anything as such. It just was natural, like how our understanding of the evolution of the book itself changed, and it just became natural that she was an equal partner rather than being on the background.
Yeah. I guess it's also, that's interesting though, that how do you decide when the project has reached a certain level at which you're happy to
end it?
I don't want to use the word end because I feel like that has
no ending in this book.
Yeah, because I feel like there isn't. But I mean, but you want to take a pause or step back or give it room to breathe for a longer period.
Yeah, so till 2017 we had a book with photographs. That would be like a regular photo book. And then I felt, we had reached a kind of a dead end with what we could do with the book. It felt like, we were pretty much using the same tropes as a traditional photo book. Pictures speaking to each other and spreads moving to something else. But the big change, and we didn't know how to go beyond that. But it was not entirely satisfying, to both of us. But only when Shweta decided to intervene with her writing from a diary and with other interventions like using paint on the pictures and scratching and other interventions with fabric. That's when I realized this has a potential beyond which what we conceived before, and that completely changed the whole texture of the book and the mood of the book, and it also felt much more honest to me. Also very because the fact that she opened up and to be vulnerable, that kind of completely changed the tone of the book.
So, I look at it now. I mean, I see even though it has won the award, and I would want to make further changes. Like for me, it's not finished. And now I would want to connect it to myths and, so it's at one level, it's personal, but then you also connect it to myths and other kinds of fiction, which I would be creating myself. So there would be further additions to the text. Like it's still unfinished in a way, but when do you abandon it? I think I have to make 2-3 more interventions, and then I will I'll be satisfied with it. But Hari is being very poised here, but I think he had this complaint that I was like a prima donna. Like he would work continuously, and then I would just work for a week maybe, and finish my work in 1 week. But I was thinking about the project more often than I was. Like I had other things on my mind. But then he would urge me to think about it, and he would sit me down and even send me certain articles and movies to watch so that I think about the book. So I think his discipline has been the guiding, has propelled it. But I was not as disciplined as it. But I would come in for 2 weeks, and I would okay, I want to do this, do that, and then so I think he's being very poised and very magnanimous right now. But there was this.
Well, you've confessed, so we're all good. This is on the record.
I have confessed. Yeah.
See, the good thing. The good thing about the grant is we actually have a deadline to print it.
Right.
So whether we like it or not, we have to abandon it and get the the process of printing it, which means at some stage we have to stop worrying about is it okay or not. It's you got to get the baby out in the world.
Yeah.
So in a way, at least the first edition would be the deadline set by the grant condition, and we don't know how it's going to go further, but at least for now we'll make some minimal changes and very minimal editing, and then it should be we should be really sitting at the printer now. Hopefully we'll be sitting very soon.
Instead, you're here with me.
Yeah.
Wanted to ask both of you and Hari, because he's a photographer. How do you position photography of the self or abstract or conceptual photography in a broader history of photo making in India? Do you think that there have been generational shifts in the approach to lens-based work?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more attention to things not just photographic these days. Like traditionally, people just wanted to take pictures and make albums, or the concept really a photo book really came much later to our country. And Dayanita is a huge force in that, I would say. Influence on the whole community of photo book makers. And the current generation of photographers are much more open to influences from other mediums like literature or cinema or material interventions. So it's also a lot of contemporary art which influences photography, and also there's a revival of process-based photography. I started as a photographer who dabbled with film. I actually learned my photography by shooting on film and processing the film and making prints. And for the last 20 years, again, the digital has completely taken over the whole field. But now there's again a revival of going back to the physical material aspect of photography. So be it Dayanita's museum bhavan, where she uses literally space or architecture and creating photo installations, or more like alternative photography, where you have mediums like cyanotype can be used to have a conceptual approach towards photography, and use the material intervention. And then even this book, for example, we have many different approaches, by intervening on the surface. And interestingly, we wondered actually, what do we call this? Is it an artist book, or is it a photo book, or it's something else? And Raghav of Alkazi Foundation, he came up with this photo book installation. So that kind of a way to understand probably another approach to photo book making. So where we actually involve lots of influences from other mediums.
Right. Which is what we sort of started the conversation with, right? The intermediate or multimedial potential of artist books or photo books. So when do you think that your book is going to be published and available, to the public, or in limited edition, or however you planned it? When is it going to be available?
Okay, so we plan to get it out by 30th of June, which is our deadline given by the grant committee. We hope to bring in at least 300 copies, which really depends on the printer. It's a negotiation between the printer, because there is a lot of intervention of eggshells and bird feathers and threads and stitching. So we need to really figure out the practical aspects of it. How do we do it when you make mass production? We don't want to lose the tactile nature of the book.
Yeah, it's got this collage-like kind of quality, right? In some ways.
Yeah, true. And at the same time, it also has to be practical to produce in large numbers. Like large number is being 300, which is what we're hoping to make. Depending on the economics and the viability. So yeah, by 30th of June, we hope to get it out, assuming there will be no big hitches and coronavirus vanishes.
Yeah, let's fingers crossed for that. But yeah, thank you so much for being on the show on Artalap with me. I really enjoyed talking to both of you and learning about not just your practice, but the history of the photo book and the possible future of photography in India. Thank you again. It was lovely having you.
Thank you so much, Kamaini.
Thank you, Kamaini.
Thank you for tuning in to Artalap with the winners of the Alkazi Photobook Grant 2020, Shweta Upadhyay and Harikrishna Katragadda. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like and share the episode over social media. For more information and updates, you can follow us on Instagram at art.alap and on Twitter at RTALAAP.